Hello and welcome. You are listening to Moodally Matters, the podcast that recognizes that your mood matters. Every episode, we talk to a range of amazing guests with experience in some of the top organizations in the world, discussing work life at the crossroads of mood, well-being, and performance. Together, we aim to create better workplaces, one mood at a time. Let's get started with your host, Moodally founder, Erika First.
Hello and welcome. I am Erika First, your host of Moodally Matters. Today we speak with my old friend Chris Valentino, whose career in production began at NYU's Tisch Film School and has taken him to Hollywood and Madison Avenue. We talk about the challenges of mood in managing the creative process and how coming back to center is the key to feeling great and working better. Now on to the episode.
So good morning, and Chris, welcome and thank you so much for speaking to me today.
It's my pleasure. It's good to see you.
Let's start out with you telling us a little bit about your professional journey that led you to where you are today.
All right. Well, we'll start with where I am. I run my own production company and small creative agency, and we do mostly storytelling videos for clients, a lot of Fortune 500 companies here in the United States, mostly in healthcare, do a lot of work with the entertainment industry as well, broadcast. And my journey started back in college. I was at NYU. I got an internship one summer working for A&E television networks, which at the time was launching a new venture called the History Channel. And I was there at the beginning. And as a result, I was hired, between my sophomore and junior year, I got a job there and kind of started in the production department and just mostly in post-production side and taking old A&E shows and wrapping them up nicely to make them History Channel shows. And from there, it just kind of grew out. I was studying film and television, had the opportunity to make a feature at one point. And so I was always involved in the creative process of storytelling in some shape or another. And eventually my A&E career moved me out of the, working directly for the company and starting a production company with some friends. And we were doing promotions and advertising campaigns for various networks and some of the cable companies. And that was sort of the path. And I just kind of stayed on that. And as time went on, I had to learn new skills because things are always evolving and changing. So I took a lot of the film and television experience that I had and started working in web and app development and exploring with augmented reality, which at the time was, nobody knew what it was. We were some of the first people to play around doing stuff. And it was always about being agile and being willing to try something that was outside of your comfort zone, and which was both exciting and stressful throughout. But ultimately, it's led me to essentially going out on my own and starting a company. I still work with most of the same people I've worked with for 20 years or so. Don't want to age myself, but that's the fact of it. And and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm working on a documentary film for a client, and as well as other small short form stuff.
Now, if I remember correctly, one of your projects was making obituaries for people before they had died. Is that correct? Or like their biography films, so
Yes.
that if anything happened to them, they were ready to go on air?
Yes, it's funny that you remember that. That was a big core business at the time at A&E for the biographies. And you had to just kind of sort of look at the landscape and say, okay, well, who theoretically is going to die? And you had to preemptively create a story. And but you can't predict anything in life. I mean, so that was always an adventure. And but that was where the crux of really news and entertainment kind of intertwined, because you had to be on the pulse. And that was always, that was pretty funny as well as depressing at the time. So.
It's a rough list to find yourself on.
Oh God. Yep. Yeah, it's crazy.
So I just that flashed back into my mind. But so thinking about your fields of work, which is obviously the creative environment, what are some of the stressors that you come up against on a daily basis?
Well, it's always demands, right? It's, because even whether you're telling a creative story and starting from scratch or whatever, we're in a business, a service business. So I have clients that I have to just make happy in one way or another. And a lot of times there's a creative, a cohesive creative relationship where we're all on the same page and we can make things happen. But at the same token, you're always, like anything, you've got deadlines, you have things that are out of your control. The past 2 years taught us that we can't control pretty much anything. And, so some of the stressors have always been meeting the demands of a timeline, meeting the demands of working with people who may not understand what you do. I think that's one of the biggest stressors, is trying to explain a creative process to somebody who might be more analytical or might be just looking at something from a strictly financial or numbers situation. So that making that correlation between, A and B and C to kind of figure out what your end product is going to be is often stress inducing. And some of the things that really affect me personally are those deadlines. Like, I'm working on a project now that isn't due until, for 3 months from now. But in my mind, I'm always thinking, well, what do I need to get done to get to that point? Even though there's things that are out of my control because we haven't shot something yet or we haven't edited something, and it won't happen for 3 or 4 weeks. But in my mind, they're constantly running through. So being able to detach from that and quietly just take a step back is one of the biggest challenges sometimes.
Especially when you're working for yourself, because obviously when you're I imagine that the stress is a little bit different from being an entrepreneur than when you were working at A&E.
Yeah, 100%. You're constantly, you've got to answer to yourself, you've got to answer to your clients, and there isn't as hard as you might try, there isn't a structured day. You're working all the time. And, like yourself, we're in a global environment now. So clients are everywhere. So your normal hours don't exist within a 9-to-5 structure. If you've got to talk to, I had a call yesterday, 8 a.m. my time with somebody in England, and then I had to stay up until 10 p.m. to talk to somebody else. And so, it's just, you're stretching yourself so thin to try and fill out that time. And then you've got to look for those moments in the context of that to still be centered, whole, and human. And that's one of the biggest challenges. What's been, I guess, a fortunate side effect of COVID and all the impact that it's had on our business is the remote aspect. Being able to work from home, being able to still collaborate in a digital world and do things without any limitations, really. There hasn't been anything that's kind of affected the workflow or the process. But what it has given me is, if I'm working on an edit and I'm going to render something and I don't have a call for an hour, I can get up, go for a walk with my dog, come back, and just get that headspace centered again to get back to where I need to be. So that is good. Being able to not be confined by an office situation where you can't leave or you have to be on point, or, and you're in a meeting that perhaps is unnecessary or going on too long. So those are that's been sort of a benefit, I guess, of all of this, is just basically finding that time. And that's been helpful to kind of stay in a good mood throughout it all.
Oh, you just gave me my segue. So looks like we did it on purpose, but we didn't. So talking about mood, obviously, I also worked in the creative industry, and you're in the service industry. How much does people's mood, your clients, your collaborators, your teams, your own, impact how your day unfolds?
It's one of the biggest factors. It impacts every level of what you do. If you're working with a client who is excited about what you're doing and you know just feels that same momentum you feel, then you're going to feel it, right? Everyone's going on the same ride. But if you're with somebody who doesn't see it, or maybe they're having a bad day or whatever it is, I think we all have a hard time of leaving stuff behind. We carry that baggage with us no matter what. And but so if I'm in a situation where somebody, either we're just not connecting or we don't see eye to eye, it can really derail everything. And I'm the kind of person that even if you're the client and you're paying me to do something, I will argue if I don't agree with what it is you're asking me to do. And that is something that I feel passionate about, primarily because a lot of times I'm working on creative content, which is telling people stories. And so if I was sitting and interviewing you and talking about your business and your work and your life and family, I want your voice to come through authentically. And sometimes, your assignment is to just do X, Y, and Z. And so that's where often I'll have friction, but we'll ultimately get to where we need to be, and it'll be a better product for it. But that mood can affect everything. And when we're working in an agency environment, which you're familiar with, you have multiple people at the table. And a lot of those people sometimes are answering to one person who sets the tone for everybody. So you might have a leader that you're working with who may not be all that inspiring, and therefore it'll drag down everybody else, and then it'll trickle down. The people that are working for me, whether it's the editors or designers, if a client's unhappy with something, I can't take that and dump it on somebody else. We got to figure out a creative, collaborative way to lift up what we're doing, not turn it into something that's going to just make everybody feel down. Because when you're down, you get slower and everything just comes to a halt. So
yeah, and so going back to the point of sometimes the client doesn't necessarily have a thorough understanding of the creative process and of what's doing. So sometimes they can make comments that can be depressing, let's just say. But you still have to make those changes, right? And you have your creatives or your directors and your editors or whatever, and your designers who hear this feedback, and they get demotivated by the fact that because creative people are exalted by people, they treat their products as babies, and everybody wants the other person to love their baby. So when you critique their work, they can go into a funk. I've had creative directors who would disappear for 3 days after they got negative feedback, just because they had to deal with their whole emotional reaction to that. How do you, as a business owner and the bridge between those two, navigate that experience?
Well, admittedly, I've lied to people, like my designers, on more than one occasion. They love it, but I think we should try to explore this. You know what I mean? You've got to sort of figure out that way to, like you said, artists are emotional people, and we all are. But, when somebody's putting a piece of themselves into what they're doing, which makes it ultimately so much better, you have to kind of temper that. And I've worked with creative directors too, who've sort of thrown their pencils down and walked out of the room. And, ultimately everybody just kind of needs time to process. And so part of it sometimes is giving that time and to kind of talk through it and say, well, let's try to understand what they didn't like about it. Or if you really think this is what we need to do, how could we get them to come around? And so a lot of times it's just sort of, it's discussion, it's conversation, but you can't always overcome that, because sometimes your client, at the end of the day, who's hired you to do a job, you got to do your job. And that means doing what they need or what they want. So you have to come to the table prepared to put all of your effort into it, but also be prepared to understand that, it may not be ultimately what you envision at the end is going to be the final product, but that doesn't make it any less worthy if the people that have hired you love the end result because that's where they want it to go. Then you got to take that and embrace it. I have one colleague of mine, one of our creative directors, who every time a client wants to change something, his response is like, okay, it's not going to be a Clio winner, but fine, we'll make it. That's always his fallback. We're not going to win an award with this, so I don't care. We'll do what they want. But, you can't take that approach either, because you have to kind of be willing to accept whatever criticism or whatever changes there are, but sort of like find it in yourself to say, all right, well, we can do that. All right, it may not be ideal, but let's make this great. And that's challenging for anybody.
And I was actually going to just add on to the point that it seems odd because, when we work in a work environment, we want everybody to be on the same page and happy and doing their thing. But actually, usually the best directors and the best creatives are emotional people because they are so vested in what they're doing and they want it to be perfect and they have a vision and they need to express it. So you almost want, and this is one of the difficulties of being in production, you almost want a out there director or out there creative because they put all themselves in. And so most of your job becomes actually managing the moods of your creative person to get them in the right place to bring out the best that they have to have. And a lot of that is by shielding them from negative criticism because most don't take it well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in my old company, we had a lot of that where there were several of us sort of all leading specific silos of creative. And then there were several people that worked for all of us who had to then execute those things. And, there wasn't always a direct line of thought or creative. And so there was a lot of friction. And sometimes you had to protect an artist from another creative because, the creative didn't like what they would want to do. And their, way of critiquing it is to just destroy it or blow it up. So you got to take that and then somehow manage that other person and say, okay, we've got to let's bring this around and let's see how we can do it. But then you have to manage those relationships in a way where they're still collaborative, even within the context of conflict. And that is where you sometimes find the best results, for sure.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I mean, I always found that the negotiating the different points of view led to kind of a new space that neither had imagined at the beginning, and which frequently where the innovation comes from. But let's talk about you. So we're talking about your role, basically having to be a bridge between these two worlds of creative and commerce. Can you think of a time where your mood kind of got away from you and negatively impacted your performance? Like you said something you didn't mean to, you did something you didn't mean to, and then you had to walk it back, or you realized like, oh my God, what I must have been in some headspace because I never would have done that normally.
Yeah, I think there's been a few of those situations sometimes where, especially when I'm wearing multiple hats. If it's a creative hat, it's I'm producing, I'm directing, and executive producing, which is different than just being a producer. And so you trying to wear all those things down. I found myself in the situations where trying to manage a lot of different people and a lot of moving parts. When something didn't go wrong, like I would just lose my mind. Be like, this can't happen. Are you kidding me? You just kind of get to that point. And then what happens is you get so focused on what didn't go right that you get derailed from what you should be focusing on. And a lot of times, like it's a good walk or it's it's a good coffee break to kind of reset. You still almost have to remove, I find I have to remove myself from the situation when that happens. But yeah, there's been situations where just things didn't go right, or you feel you've got to go all the way back to the beginning to start over, and it's sort of like, do I even want to do this anymore? I think we all get to that point. And but like you said earlier, it's sort of like you have to take that and figure out, okay, well, how do we navigate to a new space where we're all going to be happy? And sometimes that takes a lot of work. Sometimes it's easy, and it's definitely easier when you can lean on people, as opposed to always trying to silo responsibility or silo emotions. I think the more that you can kind of look to those that you're working with, or even people outside of what you're doing, like get another opinion or get somebody who's removed. Sometimes if you can have that dialogue, it does kind of unlock those moods. It does brighten it up. So I've found myself in situations like that before, for sure.
That's really interesting. Also, because it's kind of a consciousness that I can't see this now because I'm in a certain headspace. So I need someone else with fresh eyes to look at, like, am I overreacting? Am I reading this right? Like, how do you see it? Which is an interesting also approach to do, even for any of us on a normal day. Like, once you get into that space and you're convinced that the company has it against you and all this, have someone else take a look at it and say, like, am I reading this properly, or am I paranoid? Because we do, once we get into those negative moods, we actually neuroscientifically become much more paranoid, hyper reactive, and we assume that everyone's out to get us. And so we don't see things clearly. So getting that third opinion or an objective opinion on your situation. So I wanted to, in those days where you're asking yourself, do I even want to do this anymore? Obviously, you're still doing it. So what do you do to yourself to get yourself into that headspace where it's like, no, you know what? Okay. Like, do you have any routines or methods or tricks?
I mean, if we on a larger scale, if I look at even just the general days, or sometimes where it's kind of like, getting out of bed is, do I want to go to work today, kind of thing. I find, for me personally, things that will always redirect my mood, even if I'm stuck creatively, if I can't get an edit to work or a script to come together, I find music is always my go-to. And it's been that way even in terms of drafting some of the stories. If I know the tone of what I want out of it, I'll kind of pull together a soundtrack from maybe a movie or something else that's influenced and had that effect on me. So I pull those basic emotions, or recall those emotions, to kind of help me center and focus. And it's the same thing, if you're on set and something isn't going right and you want to just blow it all out and walk away, like, that's when for me, it's like, I gotta go and grab a coffee, get the blood sugar going, go for a little walk, and then come back. And usually that's all I need to do, or it's call somebody who's not there and share the experience, because sometimes you just need to release it. For me, at least, I just need to kind of make that shift. And so it's either communicating with somebody outside of the specific situation that I'm in, or it's just simple as putting on music, or kind of, the music is probably the big thing, I would think, for me.
And what's your go-to song or go-to band?
Well, oh God, I don't think I have one, honestly. Like, what I have been doing recently, this past year, COVID, is I've been playing like old 40s music, like just some of the big band standards. Like, and it's sort of like, there's something about that music that just shifts. Maybe it takes me back to being a kid and hearing it, whether it's Louis Prima or Jump Jive, and I don't know what it is. Right, exactly. But I remember like hearing my grandparents have those songs, and it's kind of like they come back. Or like now we're heading into the holidays and you go back to like those classic singer songwriters. I haven't found a contemporary Christmas music that I like. You know what I mean? That doesn't work for me. But so for me, like this past year has been finding like all that stuff and discovering things I never heard before. And so that's where I've gone to recently.
That's so interesting, because I was actually just thinking, as I asked you the question, I was also thinking like, what have I been listening to? And much to my daughter's dismay, I've been a little bit obsessed with the Come to Your Senses track from Tick Tick Boom. And I was thinking like, why did my daughter hates musicals like with a passion, and I'm not a big, I always think it's weird when you're talking and somebody bursts into song. But when I was a kid, I did a lot of musical theater, so I have it, in my heart. And so I was thinking like, why am I so attracted to this song? And like you said, it's because it took me back to sort of a place when I was much younger, but not younger, like fun 20s, like 8, 9, things felt like young and innocent and all fresh. And so I think that's interesting when you say about these 1940 songs that, you remember your grandparents playing it. So it takes us back to like a very sort of safe, protected, happy, innocent time, which, which the nostalgia itself will kick you into a different place and make you even nicer to the people around you.
Yeah, 100%.
So let's talk about well-being, because we kind of got into that. What is your definition of well-being at work?
I think for me, it's just being in a space where I can be somewhat clear in thought. Right. A lot of times I get so hyper focused on whatever I'm doing. Other times I'm constantly multitasking because I'm dealing with the business side, I'm dealing with the creative side, I'm responding to numerous emails and requests. And so I need to be able to kind of jump between all of that without losing the focus and the clarity on what it is I'm supposed to do. So for me, well, if I'm in a good space where I can do that and kind of jump around and, check an email, respond to an email, work on a budget, but then also go to a script or something, then I feel good. And that balance makes me feel good. I will admittedly say that when you first shared Moodally with me a while back now, like there were times like I would just say, all right, let me just put it on, let me listen to it while I get something set up, and those
paid
were
endorsement.
Not paid endorsement, but I found, I just enjoyed, and it just and that is an example again going back to the music side, right? Like you've taken simple thought, not to simplify the science behind it and the work behind it, but you've taken essentially just simple conversations and words, you put them together with music that sort of emotes a feeling and kind of helps, I don't want to say manipulates, but it basically gets you where you need to go.
Encourages.
Thank you. It just basically puts you into that space, and so sometimes like, all right, so they recommend this one, let me just hear it and just see it. And so sometimes I only catch little pieces of it if I'm distracted. Other times I will sit and literally just devote attention to it if I need to be in a specific headspace. Often I would the first thing I do in the morning after everybody's out of the house, I'll go and exercise, and sometimes my end of exercise routine was to put on one of the Moodally, tracks just to listen to it. Because at the time I was trying to, he would ask me, why don't you, to check out it, see how it works and give you feedback. And so I just found myself really in that routine where it was kind of, you do this intense exercise and then you would just kind of like sit and relax. And it got me in a great spot. Does that make sense?
It's such an interesting also concept, because it's kind of like you we talked about it before, you can become someone else when you get into a different headspace or you get angry. You can embody a different, maybe less attractive version of yourself. And so when you have like your mood and your well-being set and your thoughts clear, you are 100% the person that you know you are, and you can respond according to the way that you feel is faithful to yourself. So it's kind of interesting that the well-being space is kind of that neutral area where you're 100% who you know you are without being tainted by stress or clients or deadlines and stuff like that, which I think is a really interesting idea.
Yeah. Which probably relates back to the whole nostalgia feeling you were saying before. Like, if you think about when we were younger, we didn't have all this external weight or responsibilities. So you experienced things and you just felt the joy in that experience. And so for me, like, music gets me back into that space. It gets me centered to kind of the root of who I am. And that definitely helps improve the work that I'm doing.
I love that. That's such an important thought. I'm going to steal that from you. Now, what about the people that you... What about the people that you work with? Because obviously you manage a giant team. How, what does well-being for you towards them mean? Like, how do you want to make sure they're feeling well?
Well, I will tell you, the majority of the people that work closely with me all like kind of share a similar outlook, right? Like, everybody's pretty supportive of one another. Everybody loves the aspect of work that they do. What I have to often kind of remind people is to take a break, to step back, because even if we're against a deadline, if they're, we got to get this done, and they're going to work through lunch, or they're going to put their lunch on their keyboard, which drives me nuts. Then they're not giving themselves the space to, go to the bathroom to have a drink. They can't just be so hyper-focused in what they're doing, because then I don't think they're bringing the best of themselves to that. And, since everybody's been in a home work environment, I think it's gotten a little bit better, because I think as much as we can get focused and close our doors and get into our space and do our thing, we also have the freedom to just move around unjudged, right? Like, when we're all sitting in the same room and you got 4 After Effects artists and you got an editor here and this and that, everybody feels like I have to be working harder than that person, or I have to do, and that's kind of removed, and the work is still great. There's deadlines are still made or met early, and it's because everybody just feels a little bit lighter. And I think so COVID's kind of helped with that a little bit. Just this forced isolation in some ways kind of gives people, gives them more space, I guess, is the way that I look at it. But I also have a couple people that I work with that have, they have kids at home who they've got to, take here and there, or meet at the bus or whatever it is. And I'm just like, family first, let's do it. I mean, unless we've got something scheduled on the call, don't feel like you can't leave and do what you do. And I think that balance also helps. And I think also knowing that nobody has to ask permission to do anything, because there's respect, there's understanding, and there's compassion for everybody's place in life. I think it also helps people in their position.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like you're already a rather evolved manager, because not everyone is, I've heard a lot of horror stories of people saying that they had to keep their computers on while they were at home so that the boss could make sure they were working. And, that's just, it's so counterintuitive, because the more you feel disrespected or untrusted, if I'm going to accuse you of the crime, then you might as well be guilty of it. So people end up playing into the role that you paint for them. They're like, you're a criminal. They're like, all right, fine. Then I'm going to skip out early because that's what you've made of me. So, it sounds you're already very aware to paying attention, actually encouraging them. And I think it's also because we know that creatives who are in bad headspaces don't produce well. And I think a lot of people, that it's not exclusive to creatives. It's all of us. If we're in a bad headspace, we don't produce as well. We may deliver, but actually the quality of our work suffers because we don't have access to that, the richness of our full brain. And it's probably a little bit more typical, we know, dealing with creatives because they are so much more expressive about their mood states, that we know that if they're not calm, you have to keep them in a good mood state, otherwise they don't work. But it's true for all of us that the quality of our work is really impacted and the relationship with our boss. If I don't feel like I can go get my kid and you put me in a position where I have to choose between my family or my job, that's a tension, an emotional tension that you don't want to put onto your employees, because it creates resentment, and eventually they're going to do something to get you back, which is...
I think also, for us, I mean, we started in a different structure than we are both now. And, I look back to some of those early days and, the companies that I've worked at prior to working on my own, like there was always that heavy expectation or, and everybody expects people to do what they need to do, but there was always that heavy, you have to do this, or you have to report this, and you've got to, it's like everything was watched to the point where you just never totally felt valued. And I think that's, the kicker. Like if you're going to hire somebody, and whether they're brilliant at it or they're starting out on their first day, regardless, like you just have to give them the respect as another human being to kind of give this space. And like, you're here, this is your job. And, if you need help, reach out. I trust you do great, but, and a lot of that does rely on, all of us to communicate. And I think that sometimes people might be too afraid to say what they're thinking, or to ask, can I leave early, or can I do this, or whatever. But I think if you don't ask, you don't have those conversations, you're hurting yourself as well.
Yeah.
But, I definitely learned a lot being in that position where I always had to answer to somebody or to a corporate ideal that it, for all intents and purposes, is totally made up by somebody, It's like, it's one's interpretation of this is how we have to do things. But then if you're in a different department, this is how we do things. And that's a big challenge in work.
Yeah. And I always, one of the things I say, because I still do like a lot of mentoring for younger women and stuff, I say, don't choose the company, choose your boss, because ultimately how that person sets the tone in their team and sets the work is what counts, because the company may look like this, but if you end up working with somebody who expects you to be reachable at all hours of the day, that's your reality. So make sure you have very clear on who you're working for, because you're going to end half of your job is also managing your boss. So is this someone that you can manage, or is it, going to be a nightmare?
Yeah.
And then my last question for you is, what advice would you give to somebody entering the workforce today and how to deal with their own mood and well-being in the office?
Well, I get a lot of, emails or call, people reaching out all the time who want to kind of work in the space, and they're always either looking for a specific job or want to know how to get started. And the biggest challenge that everybody faces, at least right now, is even though there's seemingly this great wealth of opportunity out there, it's still very small and it's still very contained, and there's only so many jobs that are available. And so for a lot of young people, it's tough to break in and find an opening where they can start. And when you don't find it after 5 emails or 100 calls or whatever it is that you're doing, it can really beat you down. And the few people that I've spoken to, and some really talented people that, just didn't have an opportunity for them to work together with us. But I'd be like, look, just stay focused on what it is you love about what you want to do, and kind of be true to yourself, and create any opportunity that you can. Be mindful that, there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of obstacles. I think I'm one of those people that if I get an email, I will respond to it, whether I know you or not. But I know there's a lot of other people, it's just like trash, delete, whatever. If it's a blatant sales thing, I probably will trash and delete it. But if it's somebody who's genuinely reaching out, looking for experience or advice, like whether I know them or not, I'll take a minute to respond. It's kind of a human thing to do. So I just kind of remind people to just, to be persistent, to kind of find a space that you can, do what you love and still pursue what you love, and know that things take time. Patience is like, the best thing that you can have. But persistence is also important.
Yes, especially in your field, which is it's a tough field to break into.
Yeah. And it's a brutal field too at times. So. Yes.
It's one of the hardest. I mean, I feel incredibly lucky to have been able to work near. It was actually my initial intentions out of college were to go into production, and I ended up moving to Italy, which took me on a different path. But I would have had 8,000 more wrinkles on my face if I had started in production. I don't understand how producers do it, because it's one of the hardest jobs on the planet to do that every single day. But yeah, it's a tough business. Now, where can people that are interested in knowing more about you and your company, where can they find you?
Well, my company website is beanlabs.com, BEAN labs.com. And, a lot of some of the work that I have is there. That's primarily where, you can kind of find a bit about me. And I have a personal website too, which is some of my directing and creative work. And that is mrvalentino.tv. And those are the two places at least find me online. I'm on social, but I haven't been too busy to actually be persistent with it. And of course we're on LinkedIn too,
and now that we know you answer emails.
Yes, I do. I do answer emails. That is true. And several other people do for me as well. And it's just kind of, I don't know, if you can, if you're looking for a start and looking for advice, and don't be afraid to send that email. Just be genuine, and don't be formula. Don't send an email out and CC 90 other people in that email, because then I know you didn't take the time, but yeah, I mean, everybody needs a start. I needed one. We all need to start somewhere and figure out where we want to go. And also we need to understand, young people starting out, that your path isn't linear, and it doesn't mean where you're headed now is where you're going to end up. So
I am proof of that.
Yeah. So give yourself a break when you need it, and understand that, it doesn't have to be a solo journey either. There's people out there that want to help other people. So, yeah.
Awesome. So thank you so much for taking your time to talk to us today, and we hope to talk to you again soon.
Well, thank you, Erika. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Moodally Matters. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Moodally Matters.